Pluto, the planet of ordeals and the transformations that arise from them, re-enters the zodiac sign of Aquarius. Next on the Astrology Hub podcast. Hello, my name is Christopher Renstrom. As you may know, the Astrology Hub podcast is getting more streamlined in an effort to continue bringing you great content without overwhelming you. Moving forward, my show will continue to be available as a free offering once a month. However, if you'd like to see my show every week, you can still get access to it as a premium podcast with our Inner Circle membership. If you're not an Inner Circle member, but you want access to all 4 episodes a month, we have an exciting offer for you. It's Astrology Hub's newest tier of Inner Circle membership called Grow. It's the most accessible level of membership we've ever offered. And in addition to weekly podcast episodes you'll receive from me, you'll also receive daily Cosmic Pulse updates delivered via text, new and full moon snapshot videos, a new moon intention setting ceremony, a private community of star lovers from all over the world, and much, much more. Learn more and join me at astrologyhub.com/more-Christopher. And if you choose not to join the new tier of membership, I look forward to continuing to be here with you the first Monday of every month. This time, I wanted to talk to you about Pluto and the Sun, both entering the zodiac sign of Aquarius on January 20th. Did you know that the month of January was named after the Roman god Janus? Janus was a remarkable god in the Roman pantheon. He wasn't borrowed from the Greek pantheon of deities, but was actually completely invented or created by the Romans themselves. Janus was a two-faced god. One face was the face of an old man, and the other face was the face of a young man. And so this god, Janus, was the god of thresholds. Armies that marched off to war would march through the gates of Rome out into the hinterlands to fight their battles. And by marching outside the gates, they were leaving Rome, the city of Rome. And when they returned to Rome, they returned back through the gates, back into the city with hopefully their spoils and their trophies of victory. So Janus was this idea of crossing over a threshold. And it makes perfect sense, if you think about it, that Janus, the two-faced god, would be the god associated with the end of the old year and the beginning of the new. So this idea of two-faced also lent itself to the idea of looking out. One crosses a threshold and goes out into the world, and looking in. One comes back from their adventures or their to-dos or their business out in the outer world, back into the inner world. They are returning back home or returning back to their interior life. So this is part of the description of the idea of the two-facedness of Janus. But what we also see in Janus are the traces of the planetary rulership of the zodiac sign of Aquarius. Okay, when we see these two faces, there's a young face and there's an old face, we're kind of reminded of one thing right off the bat, which is the changeover from the old year into the new. This used to be represented and still is represented by Father Time being accompanied by the baby New Year, who's dressed in a tux and diapers. So you have Father Time with his hourglass and his scythe walking next to baby New Year, who is in a top hat and sort of tucks tails and diapers and represents everything that's going to be new. So the old is transitioning the baton of life from history to the future. Okay, and this we see in the juxtaposition of Father Time and the baby New Year, which is so popular with the depiction of New Year. What we also see here, as I referenced earlier, is the co-planetary rulership of Aquarius. Aquarius is ruled by 2 planets in astrology. There is the traditional ruler, which is Saturn, which is always portrayed as an old man, often with a scythe and sometimes even an hourglass. Saturn's Greek name was Chronos, and that is where we get time. Chronos means time, and also a chronic, like a chronic condition, something that never changes and is something that you have to live with. That also is associated to the planet Saturn. So Saturn is kind of like the old face, and then there's the new face. Although in the story of Saturn and Uranus, it's kind of reverse. Uranus is Father Sky. Ultimately, he is eternity, and Saturn is his child Time. And there's a whole story where Saturn severs the bonds between time and eternity and starts life here on Earth. So this idea of living outside of time, eternity, is very Uranian. And in astrology, we associate Uranus with the principles of idealism, with farsightedness, with inventiveness, with innovation. Science, particularly in the 1930s, was very much associated with the planet Uranus, where all sorts of technological breakthroughs were being made. And so Uranus carries with it to its day this affiliation with modern marvels, with modern technology, and with hunger for the future. Everything is in the future. So, those future visions of perfect utopias and societies, these all fall within the realm of Uranus. Uranus is always looking ahead. Saturn, who castrates, okay, that's what happened actually, his father, and separates eternity from time. Saturn was always associated with the past. Why was he shown as being old and wizened? Because in the original 7 planets of astrology, Saturn was the slowest moving planet. It was the dimmest, the slowest moving, and so it was associated with old age because it was so remote, it was so far away, and because it took so long to make one orbit around the sun or to return to its place in the sky at the time of your birth, which was usually about a 28 to 30-year return. Okay, so Saturn was always associated with things being old and ancient. And so when we look at this old year, new year, we see Saturn, passing the baton of life to the new year. And Saturn then becomes the caretaker or the guardian of everything that has come before. And so Uranus, although he's portrayed as a baby, Uranus is eternity. And what's time to eternity? I mean, eternity stands outside of past, present, and future. All of them are the same as far as eternity is concerned. So that sort of sense of being youthful or even abstracted has always been associated with Uranus. So this I find fascinating because January, which is the beginning of Aquarius, is associated Janus, as I said, the two-faced god, the one looking out, the one looking in, the one looking to the future, and the one looking to the past. So what's marvelous is that on January 20th, both the sun, okay, which is regarded as, we know that the sun is a star, but in astrology, the sun is regarded as the brightest of the planets, okay? The sun and the moon are regarded as planets in astrology. So the sun is the brightest of the planets. When it's out in the sky, which is daylight, you can't see the other planets. Sometimes you can see the moon, but you really can't see the other planets, much less the stars. So there's a brilliance to the sort of sun. And so the sun will always represent the heart of the chart. It represents the identity. In a lot of astrological circles, it's associated with the ego, and sometimes it gets a bit of a negative bent with that. But the idea of the identity, the core self, or the self, rather, is very much associated with the sun. And it makes perfect sense because the sun will always be the heart of the chart. It's where you begin in all chart interpretations is with the sun, with the birthday, because the sun in our solar system, all the planets orbit the sun. So just as the sun is the most important feature of our solar system, so the sun is also the most important feature in an astrological chart. So here you have the sun, which is the sense of authenticity, identity. It's what you identify with in an astrological chart, the sun. The sun in Scorpio identifies with Scorpionic themes and temperament. The sun in Gemini identifies with Gemini themes and Gemini temperament. And this is the center that holds the chart together. but both the sun and Pluto are entering Aquarius together. It's almost like you can imagine the two planets hooking arms and stepping over the threshold together, like in a musical comedy, like, I don't know, Oklahoma or something like, hey, so they're both like sort of leaping over, the threshold together on January 20th. So we have the sun, which is so close to us, the most dominant light in the sky. And then we have Pluto, the last of the planets to be discovered, the most remote, even more remote than Saturn. So remote you can't even see Pluto with the naked eye. And Pluto was indeed discovered through guesswork and through looking at different photographs that were taken in an observatory, and I believe it's Arizona. So Pluto is the hidden planet. It's the most remote planet. It's the smallest planet. It got demoted a few years ago to planetoid or dwarf planet or some sort of happy or grumpy or sneezy in the seven dwarf pantheon. But anyway, but as everyone knows, big things come in huge things come in big packages, and this is what Pluto stands for. So if we're looking at towering trees, like imagine a towering redwood forest. Well, where did that redwood forest come from? That redwood forest came from a seed, which is the smallest little thing, which is planted in the ground under the soil, a seed, and seeds are ruled by Pluto. So we have both the revealed self, the seen self, the this is who I am self, and then we have the seed self, the Pluto self. We have the sun in the sky, which is what the sun represents, but the core of our Earth, I believe, is as hot as the sun is in the sky, and there is a molten core, and so you can almost think of it as a buried sun within, and that is associated to the planet Pluto. So both of them are entering into the zodiac sign of Aquarius. One planet, the sun, will only be there for 31 days, and the other planet, Pluto, will be there for 24 years. So here they both sort of cross the threshold into the zodiac sign of Aquarius. So what are we supposed to think of this? What does this mean? What are we looking for, all right? Well, we know that in astrology, Pluto is the planet of ordeals and the transformations that arise from them. Now, nobody really likes the first part. It's always kind of like, Pluto is the planet of transformation, okay? Like they'll sort of like skip the ordeals part, like, go to transformation, kind of like, I don't know, different guests on the Oprah Winfrey show showing up. And, I came in as a brunette and now I've gone and been transformed by beauticians into a blonde. And look how different I look and fabulous. And everyone's like, oh, you're transformed beauty. Behold. No, Pluto is the planet of ordeals and the transformations that arise from them. What does that mean? What it means is to connect with the solar energy of Pluto, or with the energy of Pluto. What you do is that you descend down into the underworld, all right, which is the realm of Pluto. Pluto was named after the Roman god of the dead. The Roman god Pluto derived his name from, or we actually get the word plutocracy from Pluto. Pluto was associated with wealth. Originally, it was the wealth of grain that Pluto was associated with. And so the idea of daily bread, that's our daily bread, comes from Pluto. But Pluto also became associated to gold, silver, precious metals, oil, black gold was all associated to Pluto, anything buried under the surface of the Earth. And as we know from recent photographs and to-dos in Iceland, you see lots of molten lava that came bursting through the Earth after announcing itself with earthquakes and a volcano erupt. So we know that underneath our planet is this burning fire, which equals the sun in the sky's fire in temperature, and is encapsulated or kept in check within the plates of our planet. So anything underneath, anything that's been buried, anything that's been denied or forgotten is going to be ruled by the planet Pluto. So you have aspirational planets Like, for instance, the sun is a very aspirational planet. It's always, going up and out to become what it wants to be. Jupiter can certainly be an aspirational planet, and Uranus can be an aspirational planet. Venus, definitely. Okay, but these are sort of the aspirational planets. Pluto is not an aspirational planet. It doesn't need to go up and out. Pluto wants to go down and under, all right? So Pluto is not an aspirational planet, but within the kiln of Pluto's energies, the transformation takes place. Within the crucible of an ordeal, the transformation takes place. This is something that every Scorpio knows, all right? That you have to go down into yourself. You have to go down into the ordeal. Sometimes it's called you have to bottom out before you can find your way. These would be modern counterparts or motifs of understanding how Pluto works in an astrological chart. It's always burying down, burrowing down. Certainly there's a fascination with the past or secrets or wealth if Pluto is very strong in your astrological chart. And in tapping into those inner resources which are usually called upon when going through a very difficult time. There are some people who are like, I can go through this difficult time, and within 3 days they're like, oh no, I can't take it, And then there are people who are like, I don't like difficult times, but bring it on, and they will persevere. And that's usually not that much to do with willpower. It just has to do with something deep inside of themselves, which has the ability to persevere. It's a fortitude that isn't something that is consciously called upon. So when Pluto enters a zodiac sign like Aquarius, it enters, it will retrograde back out. It enters, it will retrograde back out. It enters again, And this is what the modern planets do. A modern planet is any planet that was discovered after 1781. 1781 is the discovery of Uranus. And then we have 1846, which is the discovery of Neptune. And then we have 1930, which is the discovery of Pluto. And Pluto, discovered in 1930, was discovered at the midpoint between the beginning of World War I and the end of World War II, which completely transformed the way that we live our lives on this planet. With the beginning of World War I, you had it was a war that was repackaged, and sold brightly as the war that would end all wars. And then when you end World War II, you end World War II with the dropping of the atom bomb and the acceptance that humankind, our civilization, is fully capable of destroying itself. So in other words, the destruction of civilization was no longer in the hands of God, but now humankind, human civilization had taken the ability to destroy itself and the planet into its own hands. And how do you live like that? And this is an important thing to keep in mind because Pluto does rule over these dilemmas. They're more than moral dilemmas. I mean, you can try to use the idea of a moral dilemma, but the dilemmas that Pluto rules over aren't easily answered by a moral code that has come before. In many ways, when Pluto changes signs, it introduces almost a new code. Actually, I would love to say that it introduces a code. I don't think it does. It introduces a predicament. And out of that predicament will come new questions and new searches for how do you deal with this. I mean, after the detonation of the atom bomb, what becomes kind of the rule of law for the superpowers who rush to, create their own, the rule of law became the threat of mutual destruction. All right, so what's appealing about that? Nothing, okay, but it's very thanatos. It's very end of the line. It's very death wish, that the thing that was going to keep you from, going to war again was going to be mutual mass destruction. And so with Pluto, in keeping with being named after the ruler of the underworld, you have the ushering in of the age of fear, an age of anxiety, and dread on a global level. I can already hear some of you saying, "This is cheery." um, but that's not all what Pluto is about. But I have to be honest with you, as the astrologer talking to you today, that is absolutely what Pluto is about. And so a lot of times when we see a modern planet change signs, we go back in time and ask, well, what was going on in the world the last time that the planet was in the sign? And Pluto's orbit is roughly 240 years. And what was going on the last time that Pluto was in Aquarius? And Pluto was in Aquarius from 1777 to 1797. We had three major events, as far as an astrologer is concerned, or these are the three events that I'm picking out. Okay, the first is the discovery of Uranus, the planet of revolution and change, which we've talked a bit about, which upset the old order of the planets. There's a before and an after based on the discovery of Uranus. Uranus upsets the order of the original 7 planets and introduces revolution and change. And as you can imagine, 1781, Uranus is discovered at the midpoint between the American War for Independence and the French Revolution. So Uranus is very much an Enlightenment planet, and I'll get to that in just a quick moment. It's associated to the lightning bolt. It's associated to electricity and enlightenment. The other event that we have take place, this is in 1789, is the ratification of the United States Constitution, which takes place at the same time, same year, 1789, as the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen in France in 1789. And then finally, we have the Reign of Terror, which is the French Revolution from September 1793 to July 1794. This happens really at the culmination of the Enlightenment, the Age of Reason. Now, what was the Enlightenment? I want to share with you just a quick little passage here, but I want you to listen to what's being said and think about our current time. The Enlightenment, or the Great Age of Reason, lasted from the late 17th century to the ending of the Napoleonic Wars, which was in 1850. Remember that Pluto was in Aquarius from 1777 until 1797. Now, the Enlightenment stood for the endeavors of thinkers, writers, and government administrators in many countries to increase the well-being of humanity. In other words, the mission statement was the well-being of humanity as interpreted by thinkers, writers, and government officials, all right? So for them, their mission was to enlighten humanity. That was to clear away the false beliefs which had blinded people to their own interests, all right? To oppose the power of institutions which had a chokehold on society. The main target here was the organized church in both France and America, by the way. They wanted to oppose the power of these institutions which had encouraged such blindness, such intellectual complacency, so that once free of the blinders, the Enlightenment agents of Enlightenment believed that people would arrive at a true understanding of human nature and of the political and economic societies in which people lived. They wanted to increase people's well-being and happiness, and to do so by close attention to empirical facts and the use of reason. So in other words, in a nutshell, what does that all mean? You educate women, you make everyone equal, you get rid of priests, you get rid of kings, you get rid of the ruling class, you make everyone equal, the population speaks for itself, it votes for itself in a democracy. As I said, women are educated, they become participants in democracy, everyone has a voice in their government, all right? And it's not done through superstition or spooking people or anything like this. It's done through scientific principles which were believed to be completely objective, could not be disputed, and this would advance technology, and technology would advance humankind. It would advance civilization for everyone around the globe. Okay, this was the mission statement of the Enlightenment at this time. the conviction animating these endeavors was that the world didn't need to be a vale of tears. The church at that time, particularly the Catholic Church, which was the dominant religion in Europe, but also followed by Protestants, taught that the world was a fallen place, a vale of tears. You're born into this world. You scrap together the best kind of life that you do. You procreate the race and you die. Okay, that was like the idea, in hopes that God will lift you up to heaven. Okay, so the conviction was that we're getting rid of all that. That was all superstition. This was said to stunt growth and to frighten people. And we're getting rid of all of these things, and we're going to introduce something like science and math and technology with electricity, where you turn on a light and you marvel at the things that civilization can bring about. And everyone benefits from this. And you will come to believe that the world actually isn't a vale of tears, but a beautiful, wonderful place to live in. The earth was seen as the destined home of humanity and a place where happiness is attainable. These were the principles of the Enlightenment. You can hear Aquarius in all of that, and you can even hear Uranus in all of that. But you can also hear Pluto too, right? Pluto, like Saturn, its brethren, they're almost like brother, sister planets, okay? Sibling planets. Pluto, like Saturn, always asks the question, the spoiler question, okay, all the time. It's kind of like, oh, it's great that you want to put on a show in a barn, but who's going to fund it? I don't know, Mickey. How are we going to make this? I don't know, Judy. I don't know, through zest and appeal and showbiz, or something like that. Mickey Rooney and Judy Garland. They were always throwing on shows in barns and like wondering how they were going to do this. But anyway, the thing is, Pluto asks that, how does this happen? Saturn's question would be like, how are you going to fund it? Okay, Pluto's question would be like, who's getting ripped off in the process? Who's getting trodden underfoot? What are the things that you did not take into account? Pluto is a planet that's always sensitive to the sins that have come before and that are being revisited from generation after generation after generation. This is something that Pluto and people with very strong Pluto are very acute about it. What's the dirty truth? What's the dirty secret? What's the thing that's not being talked about? And as you can see, in the examples, the United States Constitution and the Paris Revolution, the United States Constitution, you've got this claim that all men are created equal, with women being, separated or thrown out of that equation. And with a democratic society where everyone's equal and free being built on slave labor. Okay, and this is something that was completely recognized by Europe at the time. And they used to make fun of Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson when they would come over to Europe and talk about their democratic principles. And they're like, and what about the slave population that allows you to become such a wealthy nation? So what was sort of baked into the pie of this utopian vision of, let's take the United States, for instance, was a slave class, okay, which completely counteracted that statement, and which became the sin that was then passed down in the history of the United States history. When you look at something like France, okay, you look at, the citizen, and we're going to overthrow the monarchy, and we're going to have a bloodbath and kill them, and that's what they did. And, when you overthrow authorities and things like that, and yes, these people were corrupt and awful, and it was their version of the 1% that has all of this money and things like that. But there was no game plan to follow it. All there was this venting of a bloodthirsty vengeance and an anger. I mean, the guillotine was the symbol of cancel culture at its most sinister. The way that it was trundled out and cut off the heads of all of these people, anyone who was on the wrong side of this rising state. And what you saw take place in France is something that would be repeated with the revolutions in Russia and with Asia, and in many revolutions. Actually, you have lots of different variations, but anyway, that's to just sort of give you a thumbnail sketch. These were both indictments, Plutonian indictments on utopia, on a vision of utopia. You can't call it a utopia if there's a slave class. You can't call it rights of the citizens if you're, killing off the heads of states and then leaving yourself open to a military takeover, which, goes against everything that had been espoused in the original principles. And so what you had with this Pluto is this ordeal, okay, that lasted longer than Pluto's stay in Aquarius, that really defined the society that would follow. But it stained, in a way, the society that followed. Pluto will always bring up the sins or the short changes or the bitterness or the dark side of things, okay? But it's not there just to corrupt. It's there to point out. It's there to say you can't make a running jump for this beautiful ideal and leave behind gravity. All right. You can't reach towards the future and say this is going to be new and different without bringing everything that came before. God himself learns this in the Old Testament with the story of Noah and the flood. God gets to such a point where he can't stand mankind, and it's just like, ugh, this is not what I originally envisioned. So he sends a flood, he wipes out mankind, it starts again, and he realizes that it starts again, that there's no, it's kind of like Lady Macbeth, there's no scrubbing out that damn spot, because the spot is part of what you live with and understand moving forward. This is Pluto's irrefutable truth that it brings. The author, Isabel Wilkerson, in her book Cast, The Origins of Our Discontents, shares a very Plutonian story at the beginning of this marvelous book. She talks about how in 2016, the Siberian tundra, and for those of you who don't know, the Siberian tundra is up above the Arctic Circle. Basically, it's dark and it's cold, all right? But in 2016, the Siberian tundra experienced a freakish heat wave in which temperatures reached 95 degrees, all right, in the summer. And what began to happen over this period of time is that children of indigenous herdspeople, and herdspeople are the people, are natives of the land, and they herd reindeer, the children suddenly began falling sick from a mysterious illness. And this illness spread among the people and also among the reindeer, the herdspeople and the reindeer that they subsist on, okay? That's their livelihood. And Russian authorities immediately declared a medical emergency. Now, what they discovered was that this freak heat wave had thawed the permafrost. There's like a different geological layers, and there's a layer under the soil, which is a permafrost, which is permanent frost. Okay, well, this heat wave had thawed it and exposed a toxin that had been buried beneath since 1941, when the world was last at war. And it was a pathogen anthrax, which had laid buried in the carcasses of reindeer who had died generations before. And from their carcasses, now that this permafrost had been thawed, exuded this Pantheon anthrax, and it sickened the population. Eventually, the Russian authorities ordered a mass vaccination of the surviving reindeer and their herders, and they had to burn the bodies of people and reindeers that had died because of the anthrax outbreak. They couldn't be buried back in the ground again. They had to be burned. They had to be actually incinerated in combustion fields that went up to 500 degrees Celsius. And then afterwards they were doused with cinders, and the surrounding land was bleached to kill the spores so that they wouldn't infect the people moving forward. What is this saying? It's basically, Pluto's got this phrase, what's bred in the bone will out in the flesh. Something which has occurred in one generation will be visited on the next generation, the generation after that, the generation after that. It makes a lot of sense when you think of Pluto as a seed. What's the human anatomy's version of seed? Semen. Okay. So semen generates life, and that creates the next generation and collaboration, and it goes after one after another. But Pluto is also this idea that what's bred in the bone, it's not just physical traits. We also have DNA, DNA that's being passed down, and you can see inherited traits and tendencies and things like this. But it can also be history. It can also be feuds. It can also be grievances. It can also be things that have not been put to rest. Remember that Pluto is named after the Lord of the Dead, and the dead are ghosts, they're phantoms, that sometimes break out and need to be put to rest. They can be generational hatreds. They can be generational prejudices, okay, that have gone on for so long that they're not even conscious, that they feel natural, that this is what should happen. And this is something that's very pertinent. Pluto in Aquarius asks questions about society. Aquarius is about society. It's about the society we live in. And our global society is made up of all sorts of different societies with it. And societies are made up of individuals, people like you and me. But we're living at a time where just about every society on this planet is questioning government and what it needs to govern. Some of those ideals that I shared with you earlier about enlightenment, when you listen to this again, you can hear that they're actually quite pertinent topics. How do you run a government? How do you run an economy? How do you show equity, for people? Some governments have decided, no, you don't. You just don't show. Others are like, yes, you do, and or this is what we're going to attempt. We don't know if we're going to be successful or not, but this is what we're going to attempt. So this conversation is very much pertinent right now. But then you've got the issue of countries invading other countries with impunity, without recognizing borders, or you have a situation where there's one hideous mass slaying of a people, which is followed by a retribution, which brings about another mass slaying of people, even more so. And you can see it escalating, and it's fueled by generations, by centuries of vengeance and ghosts of the past, Plutonian spirit, hungry for retaliation and for vengeance. Each side claiming that they're right and being able to point to their histories and their offenses and their ignominies and saying this, and so these are things that are coming up, that are boiling forth. How are we as people with our own individual horoscopes? How do we live with Pluto? We understand a couple of things about Pluto. Pluto in Aquarius is about society, but the great Aquarian motto is that society is only as good as the people in it. So each one of us bears an individual responsibility for how society functions. Is it going to be overrun by its anxieties and its fears, by its thirst for retribution? Is it going to be overrun by complacency, passivity, like this is the way of things? Is it going to be fascinated by conspiracies and stories, and this is the way that things are working out, and there's a shadow, all of these sorts of things, whatever seizes the person, but the Enlightenment answer before was, well, science, unbiased and unsullied, will answer these questions. But all you have to do is look at the history of science and medicine in this society, and you see how it can resemble at times the Spanish Inquisition. Not only with the people who are attended to medically and those who aren't, but those who were experimented on and those who were abused in the name of science or medicine. So science's hands aren't unsullied either. So do we look at all of this and we say this is an exercise in futility? This is human nature. We're just like doomed to keep repeating these mistakes? We can, but we can't. Okay, we live on a beautiful planet, which is occupied by a myriad of species in which we are one of many. And we live in a time of great imagination and innovation. We live at a time that we've never experienced before in the world, where there is no unknown corner of this planet, where all of us collectively must decide not only are we going to live or not, but how we're going to live, how we're going to be. And Pluto in Aquarius for the next 24 years is introducing this idea, but it's not going to be done by hollering at one another or liking or unliking posts or, going and writing things on people's Facebooks or Instagram. It's not going to be done like that. It's going to be done in the simplicity of our day-to-day lives. What they call grassroots. And grassroots, as anyone who's a student of revolution knows, is a lot stronger than the things that live on top of it, just like Pluto. And so we're moving from this idea of mutual mass destruction, which ruled our imaginations and our psyches and our dreams and our fears and anxieties for so long, it still does, to mutual emancipation, okay, which is, and to mutual betterment. And this isn't going to happen because one ideology conquers another. We've seen, we've seen the clay feet of all of them, but it will lay on the shoulders of every person who walks this earth, who walks this planet. We are all the gardeners of this world. We are all the curators. We're all the citizens, okay? There is no foreign or native. We're all the citizens now, in that Aquarian sense. But again, this entrance of Pluto into Aquarius, it introduces the ordeal. We're seeing ordeals. We may see some more, but these ordeals aren't problems that need to be solved. These ordeals are processes that are being triggered in each one of us to grow and to dream of a better world. And that's not done from the soaring heights of our ivory towers. But if you're living in the spirit of Pluto and Aquarius, it's done in the guttural depths of your soul and being.